Okay, so here we're going to look at one of the first loops, a for loop. Now this looks a lot more tricky than Python, but that's because there's a lot more going on in a for loop in most other languages that use the same structure. So in a for loop, there are three parts. So you write the word for, and then you've got part 1, comma part 2, and then part 3, separating each one. I don't know why it's done that, probably because it was something. Right, so I'm going to explain what goes on in each part. So part 1, you declare variable and set starting value, right? Just like a for loop. So in Python, if you remember it, if not, then just, there we go. So we declare a variable integer, call it I, and we start it at 0. Right. Okay, hopefully that's not too confusing. Then part 2, we set the, essentially think of it as loop until this isn't true part, because kind of like a for loop isn't ridiculously different to a while loop. Like you can easily do the same things with both of them. Okay, loop until this isn't true. And just to be clear, this is just one type of for loop. I'll go through other more complicated styles later in C#, but this is just one. So part 2, loop until this isn't, or loop until this isn't true. Yes, so okay. And then part 3 is code we run at end of each loop. So at the end of each loop, we're going to do I++. Now I didn't mention this in my other video, but let's say I've got an integer called age and I set it to 12. If I do age plus plus, that will increase age by 1. I can of course do age minus minus to deduct 1. Okay, so that is what's happening here. So I could change this to a equals a plus 1 or a plus equals 1. Or anything, as long as it makes a go up by 1. I equals I plus 1, and that would also work and do exactly the same thing. I could run it and it'll go 1 to 4, 0 to 4. So it starts at 0. It won't do that number because it does that check at the top. So if you imagine that I was 4, and then after I was 4 here, it ran this line of code, and then it said, is this still true? And if that is not true, then we don't carry on. So it's not ridiculously difficult. So that should say part 3 there. So think of it as 3 parts. We start off the declaration, we put the thing that's got to be true, and then we put the increasing factor. Now this might not look as powerful because you're like, this is just not as powerful. Like it's just the exact same thing in Python. But the reason is you can run many things in here. You could have a method being run in there. You could have some other thing being run in here. It doesn't have to be these boring numbers. It normally is, but it doesn't have to be. If you want to do code that goes sort of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, so you would start it at 5. You would say while it's greater than 0, and then you would do I minus minus. So we're taking 1 off I. So that would go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There. Okay, so that's how a for loop works, really. It's not ridiculously difficult, and nested for loops would work the same. You would just do a 4 and a 4. But if you want to see that, classic exam question is something like this. I think it was one of them in the GCSE. And then, I don't know why I deleted that line, but anyway, J times I, or something. Was it J comma I? Or J times I? It doesn't matter. I times J, whatever. And then the question was like, how many times would this run? And of course, it would run 15 times, although I should obviously put that back to how it was in the paper, which I think was that. And that was plus plus. It obviously was in Python, but there we go. So we're going to loop 0 to 4 in I, 0 to 2 in J. Of course, I should have put J there. And then this will say, you know, like the numbers will come up quite easily. What happened there? Oh, what did I do wrong? Did I do something dumb? What did I do wrong? For I equals, say, I plus plus. I feel like I've done something dumb. Yep. Well, I is less than 5. Otherwise, it's not doing anything. There we go. And so on and so forth. And I think it actually was plus, because otherwise it makes no sense, because we start on 0. So 0 times 0, 0 times 0, 0 times 1, blah, blah, blah. But that was, I think, yes, there we go. And those are numbers. You could, of course, print right at I and then J. And you would see what, actually I'll do a proper write, you know, the one I like before actually. We'll do the $1. We'll do right line, dollar, and then we can go quote, and then we'll go I is I, J is J, and then I plus J is I plus J. Yeah, there we go, and then get rid of that, and that should work. Run that, and then it's going to go I is 0, J is 0, I plus J is 0, and so on and so forth, and it shows you what I and J are during the loops, and whatever. But there you go, yeah, just nested for loops. I mean, you can just remember that format really, and pretty much that's what you'll ever use for this basic loop.